At 4:38 a.m., on a frozen road east of Avdiivka, a Russian convoy begins to move. More than 40 vehicles, armored personnel carriers, fuel trucks, ammunition haulers push forward at full speed. The mission is urgent: reinforce a collapsing front line before dawn. Engines roar, radios crackle. The soldiers inside believe speed is their shield. They never see the drone. Hovering at 2,000 feet, almost silent, it relays coordinates in real time. Minutes later, the first explosion blocks the road. Then the last vehicle burns. The convoy is trapped. If rapid reinforcement was Russia's answer to battlefield losses, what happens when speed itself becomes a liability? By early 2024, the eastern front of Ukraine had entered a dangerous phase for Russian forces. Months of attrition around Avdiivka and the Donetsk axis had thinned frontline units faster than Moscow could sustainably replace them. Rather than rotating exhausted formations, Russian command increasingly relied on rapid reinforcement, pushing fresh troops, armor, and ammunition straight into active sectors with minimal staging time. On paper, the logic was sound. Russia still possessed numerical advantages in manpower and equipment. If reserves could arrive fast enough, they could seal breaches, stabilize lines, and resume pressure before Ukrainian forces exploited weaknesses. Speed, mass, and momentum, core principles of Soviet-era operational art, were expected to compensate for losses. But the battlefield had changed. Unlike earlier wars, there was no rear area anymore. Satellite imagery, commercial and military, blanketed the region. Persistent Ukrainian drone patrols watched roads, rail junctions, and logistics hubs day and night. Every large movement created a signature heat from engines, radio traffic, dust clouds, altered traffic patterns. Reinforcement columns were no longer hidden assets, they were moving targets. Geography compounded the problem. Eastern Ukraine's terrain is deceptively unforgiving. Long, straight supply roads cut through open fields with limited cover. Tree lines are sparse. Villages funnel traffic into predictable choke points. In winter, frozen ground improves vehicle mobility, but also amplifies thermal contrast, making convoys stand out even more clearly to airborne sensors. At the same time, Ukrainian doctrine had evolved. Rather than focusing exclusively on frontline engagements, Ukrainian planners prioritized logistics interdiction. The goal was not always to destroy enemy units in direct combat, but to prevent them from ever arriving intact. A reinforcement delayed by hours or destroyed en route could be as decisive as a battalion defeated in battle. This created a strategic contradiction for Russia. The faster a convoy moved, the more detectable it became. The larger it was, the easier it was to track. And once detected, Ukraine's layered response drones, precision artillery, and rapid-fire coordination could be activated within minutes. Reinforcement was no longer a solution, it was a gamble. And that gamble hinged on one assumption: that the convoy could move faster than Ukraine could see, decide, and strike. The convoy never knew it was being hunted, but Ukraine did not discover it by chance. Hours before the engines started, Ukrainian intelligence cells were already watching patterns. Not the vehicles themselves, but the absence of routine. A fuel depot that suddenly went quiet. A railhead where unloading paused, then resumed at night. A spike in short-range encrypted radio traffic along a secondary road network. None of these signs meant anything alone. Together, they pointed to one conclusion: a rapid reinforcement push was imminent. Above the front, a medium-altitude reconnaissance drone took over. It did not rush, it loitered. From 6,000 feet, it watched heat bloom as engines warmed. One by one, vehicles rolled out, BMPs first, then trucks heavy with ammunition. The drone operator marked the column, tagged its speed, and predicted its arrival at key choke points within minutes. Inside a dimly lit command shelter, a Ukrainian fire control officer compared feeds, satellite snapshots from hours earlier, live drone video, road maps annotated with previous strikes. The convoy's route was obvious. There were only two usable roads, both narrowed near a small bridge and a tree-lined bend, perfect places to stop a column cold. Meanwhile, a separate team prepared closer to the front. FPV drone pilots sat on folding chairs inside a half-collapsed building, batteries warming under jackets. Each drone was simple, almost crude, carbon frame, analog camera-shaped charge. But each pilot knew their task precisely. They were not hunting every vehicle, they were hunting the first and the last. Timing mattered more than firepower. Too early and the convoy could disperse, too late and it might push through. The strike window was less than 3 minutes. When the convoy crossed an invisible line on the map, the order was given: launch. Small electric motors whined to life. One drone lifted, then another. On the screen, the road rushed forward at chest height. Trucks, armor, snow-lined ditches blurring past. From this point on, there would be no warning shots, no second chances. Once the first vehicle burned, the entire column would freeze, confused, trapped, and exposed. The intelligence phase was over. The next moments would decide whether Russia's reinforcement reached the front or vanished before it ever arrived. The first impact came from above, but not from the sky the soldiers were watching. At 4:51 a.m., the lead vehicle reached the narrow bend just before the bridge. Snowbanks pressed close on both sides. The road dipped slightly, forcing the column to compress. Engines slowed, spacing collapsed. That was the moment. An FPV drone dropped below the tree line at full throttle, flying barely 2 meters above the asphalt. On the operator's screen, the armored windshield of the lead BMP filled the frame. There was no evasive maneuver, no time. The shaped charge detonated on impact, punching through the engine block. The vehicle lurched, veered sideways, and blocked the road completely. Seconds later, another drone slammed into the last truck in the column. Fuel ignited. Ammunition began to cook off. The road was sealed front and back by fire. Inside the convoy, confusion spread instantly. Radios erupted with overlapping voices. Drivers braked hard. Some vehicles attempted to reverse only to collide with those behind them. Infantry dismounted into the snow, scanning the sky for threats they could barely see. Above them, the reconnaissance drone adjusted position and fed updated coordinates. Within moments, Ukrainian artillery batteries already pre-aimed opened fire. The first shells landed just ahead of the trapped vehicles, walking backward with mechanical precision. Shrapnel tore through soft-skinned trucks, tires shredded, antennas snapped, command vehicles lost contact. The convoy was no longer moving, it was being processed. As smoke thickened, Russian electronic warfare units activated jammers. The air filled with interference. Video feeds flickered. One FPV drone veered off and crashed into a ditch. Another lost signal mid-dive, but enough remained. Ukrainian drone pilots adapted, instantly switching frequencies, flying manually through static, closing distance faster to shorten exposure. One drone slipped under the jamming umbrella, entirely racing low along the road before climbing sharply and diving onto a fuel tanker. The explosion sent a column of fire 20 meters into the air, silhouetting the convoy against the night. From the ground, Russian soldiers fired wildly, rifles, machine guns, anything that could point upward. Tracer rounds arced uselessly through darkness. The drones were too fast, too small, too unpredictable. Then came the final phase. Precision-guided artillery struck the center of the column. Vehicles packed tightly had nowhere to go. Secondary explosions rippled outward, shockwaves flattened nearby trees. The bridge, now irrelevant, stood intact beyond a wall of flame unused. Within less than 12 minutes, the convoy had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Some soldiers fled into the fields. Others took cover in ditches, waiting for an attack that never came. Ukraine did not need to advance. The objective was never territory. It was denial. Deny reinforcements. Deny momentum. Deny the front line, the bodies and ammunition it desperately needed. As dawn approached, the fires still burned. From the air, the road looked like a scar, blackened, twisted, silent. What was meant to stabilize the front had instead become a warning. Speed had not saved the convoy, it had exposed it. The response came quickly, but it came fragmented. Within minutes of the first explosions, Russian command elements attempted to regain control. Electronic warfare units intensified jamming across the sector, flooding the spectrum with noise. The intent was clear: blind. The drones sever the link between operators and aircraft, force the attack to collapse under its own complexity. It didn't work. The jamming was reactive, not anticipatory. Ukrainian drones had already switched frequencies, shortened engagement distances, and prioritized targets that required only seconds of control time. By the moment Russian systems reached full output, much of the damage had already been done. Air defense assets faced a similar dilemma. Short-range systems were either absent, moving elsewhere with higher priority units, or unable to lock onto targets that flew low, fast, and irregularly. Heavy systems were useless against drones operating below treetop level. Small arms fire filled the sky, but accuracy dropped sharply in darkness and smoke. Command and control degraded rapidly. Several vehicles carrying radios and coordination equipment were destroyed early in the strike. Without a clear picture of what was happening or where the threat was coming from, local commanders made conflicting decisions. Some units attempted to disperse on foot. Others stayed with vehicles that could no longer move. A few tried to push forward through the wreckage only to be halted by secondary explosions. Crucially, there was no effective counterattack, no armored push, no rapid response force. Reinforcement convoys are not built to fight en route, they are built to arrive. Once stopped, they become vulnerable by design. By the time Russian forces stabilized the situation, the battle was already over. The convoy had not been defeated in combat. It had been neutralized by timing, visibility, and coordination. And that raised a far more troubling question for Russian planners. If this was the response under pressure, what would happen the next time? What destroyed the convoy was not a single weapon, but a system of systems working faster than the target could react. At the core was persistent ISR. Medium-altitude reconnaissance drones provided continuous tracking, not snapshots. That persistence mattered. Once the convoy's speed, spacing, and route were known, Ukrainian fire control could predict where it would be turning movement into a liability. Prediction compresses decision time when a strike is planned before contact defenders are already late. The second pillar was cost imposition through FPV drones. Each FPV platform cost a few $100s. Their effect was disproportionate because they targeted mobility nodes, the first and last vehicles, rather than armor. Blocking the road converted dozens of vehicles into static targets. Static targets invite artillery. Electronic warfare did degrade some drone feeds, but EW works best as prevention, not cure. Jammers take time to detect, orient, and saturate. FPV attacks exploit that delay by flying low fast and committing within seconds. Even partial control is enough when the goal is to crash into a vehicle at close range. In short, EW narrowed the window, but it didn't close it. Artillery closed the loop. With drones acting as spotters, fires were pre-registered and corrected in real time. This minimized ammunition expenditure while maximizing effect. Importantly, Ukraine did not chase survivors or pursue territory. The fires stopped when the mission denial of reinforcement was complete. That discipline preserved resources and reduced exposure. On the Russian side, vulnerabilities aligned. Convoys remained large and centralized, reflecting an assumption that speed equals safety. Air defenses optimized for aircraft and missiles struggled against low-altitude, irregular targets. Command vehicles clustered with the column amplified the impact of early losses, accelerating confusion. The broader technical lesson is the stark modern battlefields punish concentration and haste. Visibility is constant, decision cycles are short. Any force that moves faster than it can sense and protect itself risks destruction before contact with the enemy. This is not about drones replacing armies. It is about tempo. Who sees first, decides first, and acts first. And in this engagement, Ukraine won all three. The destruction of a single convoy did not change the war overnight, but it reshaped behavior. In the days that followed, Russian logistics patterns shifted. Convoys moved smaller, slower, and more frequently at night. Routes diversified even when longer and less efficient. Units waited longer for reinforcements that arrived piecemeal rather than in force. What had once been a rapid response mechanism became a cautious, fragmented process. That delay mattered. Frontline units short on ammunition and manpower felt the effects almost immediately. Planned counterattacks were postponed. Local offensives lost momentum. Commanders became more defensive, prioritizing survival over initiative. The psychological impact was just as significant as the material loss. Every road became suspect, every movement potentially watched. For Ukraine, the strike validated a strategic direction already taking shape. Rather than matching Russia tank for tank or battalion for battalion, Ukrainian forces continued to invest in detection, coordination, and precision. The lesson was clear: denying the enemy the ability to mass forces could be as decisive as destroying those forces outright. International observers took note. Military analysts began describing the front line not as a line at all, but as a transparent battle space, one where movement itself is a form of exposure. The incident reinforced a growing consensus. Modern warfare is increasingly defined by logistics vulnerability, not just combat power. Most importantly, it forced a reassessment of speed as a virtue. In an environment saturated with sensors and rapid strike systems, moving fast without control is no longer bold. It is dangerous. The convoy's fate became a case study not of tactical failure, but of a strategic assumption colliding with a new reality. This was never just the story of a destroyed convoy. It was the story of a battlefield that no longer forgives old assumptions. For decades, military planners believed that speed, mass, and momentum could overwhelm friction. Move fast enough, reinforce quickly enough, and the front will hold. But in eastern Ukraine, that logic collapsed under constant observation. When every road is watched, every engine leaves a signature, and every movement can be predicted, speed stops being protection. It becomes exposure. What happened on that frozen road east of Avdiivka illustrates a deeper shift. Power no longer lies solely in armor thickness or missile range, but in who controls the decision cycle. Who sees first? Who understands faster? Who strikes before the opponent even realizes they've been detected? Ukraine did not win by destroying a formation in battle, but by ensuring it never became one. For Russia, the lesson is uncomfortable. Reinforcement can no longer be treated as a mechanical process. Logistics is now combat, movement is now risk. Every convoy is a potential engagement, whether it reaches the front or not. For militaries worldwide, the implications extend far beyond this war. Cheap drones, commercial satellites, and networked fire control have flattened the battlefield. The rear is gone. The distinction between frontline and support zone is fading. And for those watching from afar, one question lingers: if a handful of operators, a few drones, and precise coordination can neutralize millions of dollars in hardware, what does the future battlefield really belong to? That is the question modern war keeps asking, and it is one no army can afford to ignore. Bye for now.